I was fortunate enough to play with two Hall of Famers on the Bull with Pippen and Jordan there, then was able to go and play with two more in Stockton and Malone. And then at the end of my career, was able to play with two future ones in Steve Nash and Jason Kidd. So I've been pretty fortunate. As a matter of fact, I would be the only person at that time when I was over in Barcelona with the Dream Team watching them that I actually had, out of the 12 guys, 4 of those guys were my teammates at one point.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So we're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, can you make the pass? Yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 62. Thanks for joining me. Stay up to date with my monthly email newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming podcast episodes, future high-profile guests to appear on the show, and much more. Simply visit inallairness.com/news. Today, I welcome George Washington University legend and 11-year NBA veteran Mike Brown. We chat about his entire career to date, a great conversation with plenty of stories. Thanks, Mike, for the opportunity to talk. Towards the end of the episode, I'll share one of the best podcast reviews I've ever received. You can add yours by visiting inallairness.com/review. Show notes for this episode, including links to numerous topics we covered in the conversation, are at inallairness.com/62. Now, onto the show. My guest today was a 4-year star at George Washington University. He was named to their All-Century team in 2001. He was selected in one of the most talent-laden NBA drafts in history and is an 11-year veteran. Mike Brown, thanks for joining me.
Oh, Adam, thanks for having me there.
I appreciate the chance to speak with you today. Now, based on my research, you were born in New Jersey and you also played your high school basketball there too. How did you first become involved with the game of basketball, or what other sports were you involved with as a youngster?
Oh, as a youngster, I did everything. Baseball, football, basketball, just played with the seasons. Actually, football was my first love. It just happened to be that the high school I went to did not have a football team. They stopped their program a couple of years before I got there. Otherwise, I'd have played football also in high school.
You had the build, certainly, to play football.
Yes.
So that's interesting that the fact that they didn't have a football program as such maybe let you look at other sports as an alternative going forwards.
Well, yeah, I just enjoyed the sports, even now, I shoot billiards, I play ping pong, I bowl. So I just enjoy activities. I'm really a big tennis guy. I enjoy playing tennis. Not that much of a golf guy. But, even with my build that you mentioned, I think I could have done all right in Australian rules football, I think.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, for sure. You could have dominated over here, especially with your height as well. What age did you start to really sprout up in terms of your height?
Oh, well, never really did. Never had a growth spurt. I just ended up just constantly growing an inch or two every year. Never had a spurt. And was just always the tallest kid in my class from first grade.
Okay, rightio. Well, in terms of your high school career with basketball, did you achieve some good things there as a team?
Well, yeah. First of all, as an individual, I was kind of a late bloomer. We had freshman, junior varsity, and varsity basketball here in high school. We go to high school here 4 years. So I was fortunate enough to be on a team where we won the state championship when I was a sophomore, as far as being a role player, being called up from JV to varsity at the end of the season, and then was fortunate to also win the state championship when I was a senior. And when I was a senior, then I was the leader of the team and kind of the star of the team. So I actually won a state championship at 2 different high schools in a 3-year period.
Oh, wow. So you had tremendous success. I tried to find a bit of information about your high school career, but couldn't come across anything of note. So that's good to hear that you did very well. So did you start having numerous interest from schools across the district or obviously across America in general?
Yes. What happens is it's a recruiting process. So schools will show interest and they would start sending you letters that said that they had interest in you. So I started receiving letters after going to a basketball camp, which one of the most famous basketball camps on the East Coast was called 5-Star Basketball Camp. And all your big-time guys from New York, Philly, New Jersey, some from Chicago, Ohio, they would go to 5-Star, get rated, and that's where your high school All-Americans really would be developed and come out of. So like I was at basketball camp in high school with Michael Jordan.
You're right.
You know, we was at camp together. He was the most valuable player, actually, along with another player called John Flowers that actually ended up being Mr. Indiana and going to Indiana University for a year. But it's imagine how competitive and good the camp was. Those two guys were the co-MVPs, John Flowers and Michael Jordan.
All right. So you were right in amongst it in terms of being up there with the most talented high schoolers in the country.
Yes, you know what happens is that you really get better by playing against better guys. So how things are set up here in high school, you're playing against players in your city or your county. Then if you go forward, you play in the state championship. And then you play in particular all-star games. Now, the all-star games, you get a chance to play against other all-state players or other All-Americans in other states. And so you really get to probably the biggest game now is the McDonald's All-American game, which, you know, takes those top 24 players throughout the whole United States. But, it was a lot of fun. You know, you get to meet guys from all over the country, and then you probably may run across some of their paths again on the collegiate level once you get a scholarship and you're playing. And then if you're fortunate enough to go after college and get drafted and play in those different situations on a professional level, you may get a chance to see guys again.
Your path certainly did cross with a number of players in the future, including, of course, Michael Jordan, and we'll get to that in a little while. Now, you attended George Washington University, and you played there for all 4 seasons.
Yes.
Finishing your senior season in 1985. Now, you've got some great stats here. I've learnt that you averaged better than 17 points and 10 rebounds a game. You won the Atlantic 10 Rookie of the Year in 1982 and led the Colonials in scoring and rebounding in each of your 4 seasons. So that's a fantastic start to your college career over those 4 years. How was that transition from the high school level to then playing at George Washington?
Oh, I'll tell you, that was a big transition. First of all, because the level of competition that you're playing in college and you're playing 2-3 games a week, that level of competition is completely different than on the high school level. So at high school, my senior year, I'm 6'9". Every now and again, I run across somebody 6'8", 6'9", 6'10". In college, every game I got, they at least have someone my size or taller.
Right.
So it was a big transition because of the level of the athlete that I'm playing against. And then also I'm a student athlete. So the demand of my work schedule for studying was way at a higher level than high school.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually touched on that because I read that you graduated with a degree in criminal justice.
Yes, graduated in criminal justice. And actually, I was fortunate enough, I graduated in 3.5 years. In my household, it was really influenced by my mother and grandmother, the importance of the education. So I had to make sure that I always hit the books and got good grades. Otherwise, I couldn't participate in sports.
Yeah, well, you did a fantastic job to be able to excel athletically and then also academically. It's a fantastic achievement. So, yeah, congratulations on that some 30 years down the line, but well done.
Thanks.
No worries. Now, I read an article as well that said after your sophomore season, I think it was, you toured Spain with a team of American players. What was that experience like? Do you actually remember that trip overseas, much of what happened there?
Oh, yeah, that was a great experience. It was 1983. Now, this is my first time going abroad, and I happened to get a chance to go with the Atlantic 10. Our conference took an all-star team over, And I went over and we played in Spain, several different cities in Spain, from Madrid and Toledo and Mallorca, Barcelona, Vigo. So that was a great experience to be able to travel and see another culture, see another country, hear people speak a different language, meet people. That was a tremendous memory and opportunity for me.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'd love to touch on this next part. Between your junior and senior seasons, you were part of a very select group that participated in the 1984 US Olympic trials at Indiana University. And I think you made it down to the final 32 players or thereabouts that actually took part, which is a great effort in itself. What can you tell us about those trials and then mixing it up with some of the great players and then a handful of now gone on to be basketball Hall of Famers?
Oh, I tell you, that was going there for the Olympic trials, for the 84 Olympics. That was the hardest tryout or practice that I've ever done in my life.
Right.
That was ran by Bobby Knight. We had practice 3 times a day. And then we actually started off with about 64 guys. Then they cut those guys down to 32. And then the 32 actually played 2 games. And then it went down, from 32. Everyone went home and they brought back 20. But that was a great experience playing against all the guys. Some of them had just won the NCAA championship. Some of them was All-Americans. And some of the great big programs from your Duke, your UCLAs, your Kentuckys. It was an opportunity there to play against very good players. And it made myself, better and really got me in tune on what I needed to do to make it to that next level and to come back and have a great senior year.
It's an incredible mix of talent. Now, something I wasn't actually aware of before chatting today was that how close George Washington University is to Georgetown University. Probably makes sense when you think about it, but it's only a couple of miles apparently. Now, most listeners would know that Patrick Ewing was the Georgetown Hoyas' dominant centre, but coincidentally, your college careers happened the same 4 years. So what was it like to be so close, geographically speaking, to Ewing, given the huge media attention that he seemed to attract at that time?
Oh, it was very good. I mean, that whole D.C. area, we had from Pat at Georgetown, we had Adrian Branch, Lynn Bias at University of Maryland, which is playing in the ACC. So we had the ACC there, the Big East. We had the Atlantic 10 and George Washington. Then we also had the leading scorer in the country at George Mason University, which is about 10 minutes away from George Washington, and Carlos Yates. And then a high school All-American that was Danny Ferry, that was a senior at DeMatha High School. So we had some great talent in the D.C. area. My freshman year, we played against Georgetown. I actually outscored Pat and out-rebounded him, and the game was fairly close. So after that game, John Thompson was like, we're not going to play George Washington anymore, because he just felt that if we would come up and beat them, it'd be much more of a blow from an Atlantic 10 team or a smaller school like George Washington beating up on a bigger major powerhouse like Georgetown.
All right. That's interesting to note that that's the case as well, because I did read somewhere in an article that I did find that, you outscored Ewing, and to know that you out-rebounded him as well must have been a good confidence booster for yourself, not that you really needed to have one.
Oh, yeah, it was, because I actually got a chance to play against Pat up in the Boston shootout when I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
So I'm looking at just a year before, we got a chance to play against him up there. So it wasn't actually, my first time, seeing him and getting a little feel for him. And I'm a physical guy. So the thing was with Pat, because he's a physical player, is just not letting him get deep into the paint where he wanted to be, and make him work and to get there. And so I was able to do that. And I had, success on against him individually. We came up short on the team effort, but I had success just from my physical play with him.
Now, I read also with interest that earlier this year you were named an Atlantic 10 legend. Can you just talk about that honor? It's obviously a fantastic one.
Oh, yeah, it was. I was actually able to go back to Brooklyn, watch the Atlantic 10 tournament, was able to take my wife and my youngest daughter there. And it was a really, really nice 3-4 days during the Atlantic 10 tournament. Got a chance to meet the coach at George Washington, speak to the team there. They was able to win their first game in the tournament, saw some old friends, and really had a great time. So that's something that was special because even though I got the accolades there from George Washington University, where I went to school, now this was the Atlantic 10. So to be recognized from my conference amidst all those other universities, to be an outstanding player and to get that type of award, it really meant a lot.
Yeah, that's very special. I have to make mention you had a fantastic nickname at the time that I've learnt just today before we chatted. The New Washington Monument. You're a nickname during your college career. That's fantastic.
Yes, the New Washington Monument. They actually made the media guide cover with me leaning on top of the Washington Monument, and it won media guide cover of the year.
All right.
So that was a nice thing, and it was a joke going around campus because we had a little scare during that senior year that it was a van parked in front of the Washington Monument that was supposed to contain explosives, and it, never was detonated. They got everything clear, but the joke was I was going to be the only Washington Monument. It's the kind of thing going around campus. I'm glad that didn't happen. But the New Washington Monument, it was nice. It was nice. Nice picture, nice memory. My kids get a kick out of it because they see me, standing above the Washington Monument with my elbow on the top of the Washington Monument. So it's fun for them. And it was fun making, shooting that. And it was a nickname that it was real special to me just for the fact that we mentioned earlier, those guys, those All-Americans, a future Hall of Famer there, and Hall of Famer now, and Patrick Ewing, national championship for Georgetown, to have that kind of name in the same city as those great programs and those great players, that was special also.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great perspective to look at it as well. Just looking ahead now to the 1985 NBA draft, it took place on June the 18th at New York, and the aforementioned Patrick Ewing, who was number 1 pick overall. Now, the Chicago Bulls selected you in the 3rd round at pick number 69 overall. What are your memories of the draft day itself there, Mike?
Well, I went to the draft with my parents. It's just something we just caught the train over because the draft was in New York. We caught the train over from New Jersey, went to see the draft. Back then, I believe my senior year was 7 rounds. Now it's only 2 rounds. So drafted in the 3rd. Thought I would go higher, but I actually had an injury at a turf toe when I was a senior. And so it was just, fuel for the fire for me. It was a dream come true to get drafted. I was really happy that the Bulls drafted me. The general manager there, Jerry Krause, who at the time there, it was Rod Thorne that drafted me and gave me that opportunity. And, it was great, but I knew I had a lot of more work to do and a lot to prove because it was guys that, they got drafted in front of me. So I had a chip on my shoulder also.
Yeah. Now, you didn't play in the 1986 NBA season. Instead, you headed overseas to Italy, if I have my research correct. What was the decision-making process behind the move overseas?
Well, what it was that I went to the Bulls after draft. I played with them in Summer League. Mm-hmm. I actually set a record in Summer League for the most rebounds in the game and 18 rebounds. So things was looking really good for the Bulls. What ended up happening was the Bulls didn't have any openings at the time, so they had to make some trade. So I went overseas on a tour team that we toured Spain, Italy, Switzerland, and Belgium. So I went on the tour team, and we was overseas for about 3 weeks, a month. I was playing really well, and a team in Italy offered me a contract.
Okay.
So I called back to the Bulls, told them my situation. They still wasn't able to open up a slot for me yet. So I signed and, started my professional career, there in Italy with the Bulls still, holding my rights.
Sure. Okay. So what did you make of the style of play in Italy compared to what you'd had experienced the previous sort of 4 seasons at college?
It was more physical by far than anything I had experienced in college.
These are grown men, I suppose, too, aren't they, in most instances?
Oh, yeah, because I tell you, grown men, some of the countries that I'm playing in, the young men had to put in their time in the military as an obligation to their country. So they were, grown men. So that physicality of the game was at another level that I had experienced on a collegiate level.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. It's fascinating to hear about the experiences of players going back to this period of time. So, yeah, really enjoying it, and I'm sure that our listener is doing the same. Now, you returned home and played the 1987 and 1988 seasons with the Chicago Bulls, and this was a really fascinating period of time. Obviously, the franchise revolved around Michael Jordan, but the Bulls had yet to advance past the second round of the playoffs at that stage. I'd love to hear your perspective on the team and your experiences at that time. What did you make of being a member of the Bulls?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it because the thing that was most pleasing is that, first of all, Chicago's a great city. And Chicago is a blue-collar man city. Hard work, roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty. And that was really kind of the player that I was. So myself, Charles Oakley, we fit right into that. We had a Dave Corzine by being a local Chicago guy, going to DePaul College. He and Gene Banks were the veterans on the team. So we had a great group of guys. And besides Chicago being a great city and we being a young team learning and having Jordan as, our leader there, we only had one guy on the team that was married. So we were close. We actually did a lot of hanging out in Chicago, and we also hung out on the road. So we were a bunch of, young guys enjoying life, living the dream of being a professional athlete in the NBA and winning basketball games, and had a new coach in Doug Collins, and that was his first coaching stint. It was really good. It's a place that, I never forget.
Sounds like a lot of great fun and camaraderie as well, on and off the court. How was it to actually have a rookie head coach in Doug Collins? As you mentioned there, he obviously was a very interesting personality in the fact that he just loved to be around the game, and obviously was a former All-Star. His career cut short with injury, but how did he go? What was that like?
Well, great basketball mind, because, he really knew the game. He was coming over for being a color commentator. Doug was able to, as you mentioned, since his career was cut short, he was able to relate to guys very well, just for the fact that, he was younger and, he just had a better rapport, with guys. So it was very good. It was very good. It's a learning curve because coaching in the NBA, there's a lot of things to learn. But, we all was up in there together, from the players learning, the coaches learning. And it was a good time in Chicago to be a Bull.
There's one question I'd like to ask you particularly about Michael Jordan. I'm not sure if you actually will remember the move I'm referring to, but there was a game early in your first season with the Bulls in Atlanta where you were on your way to set a pick for Jordan, but he spun baseline and then hit a ridiculously tough layup between 3 or 4 Hawks players. Do you actually remember the move I'm talking about, or am I testing your memory banks a bit too much there?
Oh, no. Yeah. I remember the move, and especially, it's funny, you remember them, and then now here they're showing quite a few of the older games on NBA television on the Classic channel, and you get a lot of them. And actually, that game, if I remember correctly, this one was in Atlanta, and it was on TV about 3 weeks ago.
Oh, okay, right.
And one of my friends called me up and said, "Brown Bear, you on NBA TV right now with the Bulls." And I had turned it on and I recorded the rest of it because my kids then, they had never seen me play for the Bulls. I had a couple that was little that saw me play for the Jazz, but, they have never seen me play. So to see me with hair and maybe a flat top 1 or 2 years, the kids just get a kick out of that.
No, I'm sure they would. Do you have many of your own games from your pro career on videotape or on DVD, or you didn't collect many back in the day?
Well, no, I had a couple, that was converted. Not a whole lot, maybe a couple handful, maybe 8-10 games or something. Because during that career, you're looking at it, you're playing 82 games, 8 preseason games, and I was fortunate, to be going to the playoffs every year, my first several years in the league. So that would be a whole lot of games. But, it's the ones that I enjoyed that they put on the classic that I might record. Because when you look at it, I was fortunate enough to play with 2 Hall of Famers on the Bull with Pippen and Jordan there, then was able to go and play with 2 more in Stockton and Malone. And then at the end of my career, was able to play with 2 future ones in Steve Nash and Jason Kidd. So I've been pretty fortunate. As a matter of fact, I would be the only person at that time when I was over in Barcelona with the Dream Team watching them that I actually had, out of the 12 guys, 4 of those guys were my teammates at one point.
Wow. Now that's something that not many people, if more than a couple at most, as you said, would be able to say. So that's fantastic. I'll get to that in a minute, actually. Now you've mentioned the Olympics, I'll have a quick chat about that shortly. But following the 1988 season, you were drafted by the expansion Charlotte Hornets, and then I think on the same day they traded you to Utah in return for Kelly Tripucka.
Yes.
In all but one of your seasons with Utah, you played all 82 regular season games, and in 1992, you made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals on a really stacked, legitimate threat team. What are some of the fondest memories you have from your 5 seasons that you spent in Utah, Mike?
Oh, well, Utah was great because Utah, even though it was Chicago, gave me the opportunity to live my dream and become a professional in the NBA. Utah was really kind of where I made my name for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to be there under a great coach there with Frank Layden, then transition that over to Jerry Sloan, which is another Hall of Famer, and just really was able to play, make a name for myself, have success, understand, the game. And we won a couple of Midwest Division championships during my 5 years there, opened up a restaurant, had a business there in Salt Lake City. So the Jazz was good. The city of Salt Lake was good to me, and the people was good. So I really, matter of fact, I keep in contact with more of my Jazz guys than my Bulls guys, just because I have more Jazz guys, by being there for such a longer period of time. I have more of those guys.
Understandable. Do you get much chance to head back to Utah?
Yeah, actually, looking at probably going up there in about a week.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
You kind of go up and see a couple of friends and go by the Jazz office and see a couple of them. But actually, I probably get up there, probably once every 3 years or something like that.
Very good. Courtesy of the great basketballreference.com website, I've noticed that your career high in points in the NBA came in a game at Charlotte in December of 1991. And through no coincidence, I'm sure, it was a game where you replaced the bulk of minutes that Karl Malone would have played because he was sitting out with a 1-game suspension after his flagrant foul hit on Isaiah Thomas the game before. Now, I don't expect you to remember the game at Charlotte itself, but clearly, given the opportunity, you could really fill up the scoring column. And I know that in college, you actually had a 40-point game at one stage too, so you could certainly score the ball.
Oh, yeah, but and I tell the young people now, because I work with the NBA in player development, so I try to teach the young guys how to be a professional, what it takes to have longevity in this league, how to take care of your finances, how to use social media to your advantage. And when I tell them, I say, you have to look at what is your niche, what is going to make you stand out and be different in this league. So in college, I could score. When I got to the Bulls, I got Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
One of the years I was there, he got 3,000 points. Only 2 players have ever gotten 3,000 points in a year. It's him and Will Chamberlain. He averaged 35. So I said, how can I stay here? It's a thing of getting here, but how can you stay? Because I'm always going to play defense. I'm always going to rebound. So I said, hey, I need to get Michael Jordan open. So I need to set good screens, always have my hands ready, make his job easy. So in turn, now when I'm in Utah, I got 2 great players in Stockton and Malone. So it really wasn't a need for me to score. I didn't have to have my number called, and call plays for me. And so in turn, now that Carl had to sit out, I just shifted over into his spot. So the plays they ran for him, they just ran for me. And I had a whole nother respect for what he did night in and night out because I was extremely tired, from just having to score the ball and play defense. So that was a wake-up call for me, that Charlotte game.
He was just a phenomenal player, obviously, goes without saying, I guess, Karl Malone, but obviously you had a chance to work with these guys day in and day out in the training room and whatever else. How can you put into perspective the amount of work that he put into sculpting his body and to have the longevity he had for almost the best part of 20 seasons? Like, what was it like to be training alongside guys like a Karl Malone?
In the weight room is what he lived by.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never seen someone, he would go through the summer and don't touch a ball. I went out and worked out with him in the weight room one day, and he actually put 6 hours in the weight room, and this is during the summer.
Wow.
I was like, this is incredible. I said, hey, I'm doing that first morning part, which was 3 hours, and we grabbed lunch. I said, you on your own for that next 3 hours because you ain't going to kill me in that weight room. But that's what he did. He had his longevity. You saw how physical he was and the body he had. And, when you look at it, he really wasn't injured the majority of his career. So, it's definitely, I learned to be more in the weight room from him. Out of all of these Hall of Famers that I played with, I learned something from all of them. And that work ethic in the weight room, Carl and I used to hit it. I didn't hit it as much as him, but I hit it. That was what was good for me.
Now, just briefly, you did touch on the 1992 Olympics and being over there and watching the Dream Team. What did you make of that experience, being able to see the USA take home gold in a very convincing manner, to say the least?
Oh, well, just the fact of being able to put the USA on your chest to represent your country, is an honor. And to watch those guys, to be able to go to practice, to be able to hang out with them and just see these guys being guys because they're always competing against one another during the year. And to get a chance to know more about each other and compete on the same team for a common goal, that was a joy to watch.
Would have been phenomenal, I'm sure. So yeah, I'm envious of the fact that you got to go and see them win gold. Now, after the 1993 season, you were traded to Minnesota in exchange for Felton Spencer, and you spent a couple of seasons with the Timberwolves. I think your second season was the year before Kevin Garnett arrived. So what was it like trying to adjust from the winning culture that you had in Utah to play with a franchise that was still searching for its identity?
Well, that was tough because I was used to a completely different atmosphere. And what I mean by that, I was used to winning. I was used to more of a regiment type of atmosphere and team. And when you had younger guys from Leitner to Doug West, and Chuck Person, and J.R. Ryder, we weren't able to build yet that culture and that mentality of winning. So it was good guys, we got along well, but it just made work so much harder just because we lost so many games.
Yeah, it would have been difficult. I think I looked at the win-loss records briefly before we chatted today, and it was like a 20 or 21 win seasons in back-to-back years, the 2 years you were there. So coming from Utah and being perennial playoff appearances and winning division titles and whatnot, it would have been obviously very tough transition, and not to mention the cold weather, I guess, in Minnesota too.
It's the coldest place I ever lived in my life.
Yeah, right.
Listen, I tell my kids about it now. It was unbelievably cold. Nice city, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities, but just the frigid bitterness of cold was mind-boggling. And then when I would, travel in the state of Minnesota, it was other places that were still 10 to 15 degrees colder than Minneapolis. I mean, when you go to Duluth, Minnesota, and up at International Falls, I'm like, this is like the North Pole must be. It was crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't sound all that inviting, to be honest, at least the weather-wise. So we'll move on. And you rounded out your NBA career with stops in Philadelphia and Phoenix, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, playing with some future Hall of Famers as well. What did you make of your time with those two franchises as your NBA career came to an end?
Well, yeah, it was coming to an end, and I went and I played overseas. We had to lock out one of those seasons. So went and played in Italy, was able to play in Italy 2 years in a row on one team and go back to Phoenix for the last few games of the season and to get ready for the playoffs 2 years in a row. So it was good there. I was really tired of that NBA schedule of 90-plus games. And this was good, being able to go overseas and being able to play overseas. You're playing one game a week, sometime two, depending on if you're in a European Cup or some kind of tournament. And that was just good for me as I was winding down the career. And I loved to practice, so I didn't mind, all the practice that I would have overseas. And it was good for me. I was able to play in Spain. I met my wife over there in Spain. So it was, definitely a great time for me.
Yeah, great memories for sure. Did you cross paths the second time around when you were overseas playing in Europe with some players that you'd played against in America?
Oh, yes. You see them all the time. At that time, most of the teams, they could have 2 or 3 Americans per team. So you get a chance to see a whole lot of guys because most of the guys with NBA experience, these are the kind of guys that the clubs was looking to sign rather than a guy that was just right out of college, unless he went to like a really big program and was just barely making it to the NBA. So you get a chance to see a lot of guys overseas. And it's funny how you migrate and hang out just for the fact that you are in a foreign country and you have these things in common with someone from the United States. So, hey, you had guys that, oh man, my wife is cooking pancakes. Pancakes, oh my goodness, they invite you over
yeah.
And then, the next day you're competing against one another. So it was good.
Yeah, that sounds great. Now, Basketball Digest, they used to have a great feature which was called The Game I'll Never Forget. Now, when you look back on your playing career, is there a particular game that comes to mind as one that you'd never forget, Mike?
No, with me, it was more, I enjoyed, winning the Midwest Division. When I was in Utah, probably the first time we won, to be able to do that. So, mine is more, instead of an individual game, like you had mentioned the Charlotte one earlier, which was my career high in scoring, it was more of accomplishments of what we had, done. That I remember those games that finally when we were able to beat Detroit when I was on the Bulls, or now in Utah being able to win the Midwest Division, those type of things, or able to beat the Lakers in the Forum. These type of things is the ones that, I really remember because they was just more team, and it's almost like you broke through and you hit a milestone as a unit. And, that accomplishment as a unit was just more memorable for me than any one individual.
Oh, that's good to hear. So clearly team-centric. Now, did you have a favourite arena that you used to play in? You mentioned the Forum there, and obviously you played at the old Chicago Stadium, and I guess the Delta Center would have been at that stage when you were in Utah. So any favourite arenas?
Well, it's always the home arena because we just happen to at the Salt Palace and the Delta Center, we had great records. It was very seldom that a team come in and be able to win. At Chicago Stadium, the old Chicago Stadium, we won there. Favorite would probably be Madison Square Garden, just because that's where I went and saw my first NBA game at as a young, kid growing up. So to be able to go back home and have family members come there, that's the mecca of basketball. It would be Madison Square Garden. And then also I've played the majority of my career in cold places, from Chicago to Minnesota to Utah. So I enjoyed going down to Miami in January and February to go down there and play. So I would say not necessarily my favorite arena. It was my favorite arena to go to in the middle of the winter.
Soak up some sun rays as well while you're down there, no doubt.
That's it.
Yeah. Now, I have a bit of a fascination with numbers for some reason, and you wore number 40 in college, and for a majority of your NBA career, Dave Corzine had number 40 when you were in Chicago, so you wore number 17. Do you have any particular significance to those jersey numbers, may I ask?
Yeah. You know what? That's a good question because a lot of people really don't ask that on the numbers, but I wore 40 in college, and I wore 40 because as I was a young boy growing up, I watched Gail Sears. And by watching Gail Sears and, the movie he made there with Brian Piccolo, I decided to wear 40. And so I wore 40 for that, and I actually got a chance to meet Mr. Sears when I was on the Bulls. So that was a true blessing there to be able to meet him, and told him that I wore number 40 because of him. Now, when I got to Chicago, Dave was the veteran, and he wore 40. So what I ended up doing was wearing 17 because that's what I had just wore the previous year in Italy. And as you're playing overseas, you couldn't have any number that was higher. You had everything that had to be below 20.
Okay.
So I wore 17 there in Italy, then came back, wore 17 when I was with the Bulls because Dave was 40. Then when I went to Utah, I was able to go back to 40.
Got it. I love hearing those explanations of, and most of the times a player will have some sort of significance to those numbers. So that's really good to hear. And Gail Sayers, I'm not sure who he played for, but I know he is a famous NFL player.
Yeah, he played for the Bears. They made a movie about his life called Brian's Song.
Oh, okay.
And back in the original one was with Billy D. Williams playing Gail Sayers, and James Caan was playing Brian Piccolo. And Brian Piccolo ended up dying maybe his second year in the NFL. He ended up having leukemia.
All right.
And so this was Gail Sayers' roommate when he was a rookie trying to make the Chicago Bears. And they were the exact opposite, by one being the white guy that was a little strong and slow runner, and Gail being a fast, agile runner and being black. They roomed together, so they grew to be great friends and learn from each other because of their different cultures. And Gail was going to be on the team. He was basically like a Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian Piccolo is trying to make the team. He's one of the last guys drafted, and every practice he's worried about how he did. Can he make the team? Every time the coach calls him, he's worried about if they're calling him to cut him. So they were roommates, but they had the completely opposite paths to try to make a career in the NFL. And then it was cut short by leukemia for Brian Piccolo there. And they ended up making a movie out of that. And I saw that movie when I was about 10, 11 years old, and it moved me. And that's why I wore number 40 for Gail Sears.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's probably the greatest answer I've had back in reply to the question I asked about player numbers. So thanks for going into that sort of detail for us. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
After your playing days ended, you were involved in coaching at various levels. What was it like for you to be on the sidelines and not actually out there on the floor? How was that transition into the coaching side of things?
Well, never thought I would do it. Had really, no desire, and this is what I was going to do. But then when I was here, I was able to get involved with the D-League, became an assistant coach there, was able to now, I really enjoyed passing on my knowledge to the younger guys. And so being that mentor, being able to help them grow as a young man, as a player, that's the enjoyment that I get out of coaching. So I was able to do the D-League as an assistant, D-League as a head coach, was fortunate to go back to the Bulls and be an assistant coach there, and really to be able to help the young men learn is really what was real gratifying for me.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Are you open to future opportunities that might pop up at the highest level if they were to offer you something in either a personnel side of things or coaching?
Well, I like the personnel side. I enjoy doing what I do now for the NBA. And as far as the NBA is the league and working with player development and not one particular team, able to touch, players on all the different teams. But I think if I would really go back, I think I may want to do it on the collegiate level, just for the fact that I can, help those young men learn what it takes to be a young man and just be successful citizens.
Yeah, well, you've done that both academically and athletically, so you'd be very well suited for it if it did come up. Now, these days you're living in Las Vegas, and I know that you host a Fox Sports radio show. I think is it each weekend?
Yes, yep, the Brown Bear Sports Extravaganza.
How did that sort of opportunity present itself?
I'm on there. I have my partner. His name is Marty Rodick. He's been in the business about 40 years, doing NBA, doing NFL, doing Major League Baseball. And we have a show that we talk all sports, and people are able, it's not a call-in show, but they're able to text us or tweet in questions, and we'll address them on the show. And the good thing about the show that we do, we actually set up live remotes. So we're doing it every weekend at different businesses, be it car dealerships, restaurants. We just set it up at different businesses, have giveaways. So I enjoy the part of interacting and mingling with the fans and the people while we're doing the show. And then we have guest speakers that we give the number to the studio to call in. 3 weeks ago, we had Frank Layton on, and he was a blast telling his stories. And all Marty, my partner, wanted to know was stories about me for the Jazz. So Frank had some of them. So it's great. So we get coaches and we get former players and also current players to come on the show. And I really enjoy the radio.
Oh, that's great. I'll include a link to your show in the show notes to this episode. Now, you mentioned social media there a moment ago. You're involved in some social media yourself. You're on Twitter. Your Twitter handle is @BrownBearNBA, which is one of the great Twitter handles of all time. Is that the best way for listeners to interact with you online, Mike?
Yes, it is. That's the best way to get me in. I'm not on the Facebook or anything of that nature. My daughter, helps me out there, making sure everything is in line because I don't know what buttons to push and all that. So she helps me and handles that for me. But yeah, that is the best way. And we have a website that the website really explains a little bit about what my wife and I have established here in Las Vegas. And that organization, that website is called theembracingproject.org.
Feel free to tell us what that one's about as well.
What we do is we work with youth that are your high risk and troubled youth and be able to give them a classroom session and some learning, some mentorship. Ones that are doing well over the last few years, we have taken them over to Liberia, West Africa, to work at an orphanage that we have over there and do some humanitarian work. So what it is really trying to get these young people, help them get back on track, turn their life around, and, setting them in the right direction.
Fantastic. Well, I'll include a link to that as well for what it's worth in the show notes to the episode. Sounds very interesting too. Now, it's been a real treat to be able to speak with you today, Mike. I thank you for taking the time to discuss your career and everything to date, and good luck in the future as well.
Well, Adam, thanks for having me on. And I was down in Sydney there about 5 years ago playing in the World Masters games.
All right.
And that was actually a dream come true for me because I always wanted to go to Australia, and I got a chance to go down. But in 2 years I'll be coming back down there. But I'm going to visit the Kiwis to play in the Masters games again.
Oh, okay. So you would have probably dominated. How did you go?
We actually went down with 5 teams. We went down with a 40, a 45, 50, 55, and 60-year-old teams. So we were able to win 4 gold medals and 1 silver with those 5 teams. So I played in 2 age groups, so I was able to win 2 gold medals.
Did you play with any other former pro players that we perhaps would know the names of?
Yes. From Jerry Reynolds to Greg Kite, Fred Roberts. We go down and we actually have about 3 or 4 ex-NBA guys in each age group.
Okay.
And so we have the older guys from Darnell Valentine and on down the line, Harvey Catchings.
Oh, I love it.
We go down with a good group of guys. But in 2017 in April, the World Masters games are in New Zealand.
I wish I had have known that you guys were playing back in 2010 or whenever it was you came over, because all those names I'm familiar with, and it'd be fantastic to be able to watch them play even after their NBA career is done and dusted. So, yeah, good luck with that in 2017. And again, all the best, and thanks so much for taking time to chat with me today.
All right. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. You can suggest topics or guests you'd like to hear conversations with. You can leave a voicemail. Simply visit inallairness.com/voice, click start recording, leave a message and press stop. You can even listen back before submitting. press send, and you're done. Time to share another great review from a fan of the show. Thanks to CC Bud Baxter. Now, I know that's not your real name, but I appreciate the review. On the USA iTunes store, it's titled Heaven for Hoops Fans, and it reads, "Not only does Adam bring in great guests, he's the best kind of interviewer. Smart and straightforward, enthusiastic but not fawning, asking the questions you'd want to ask and then staying out of the way as the guest answers them. Terrific insight into a fascinating era." Well, I can't thank you enough for that sparkling review. Much appreciated. Worldwide, the show currently has 55 reviews, 52 on iTunes and 3 on Stitcher. Thanks for your continued support. If you add a review, I'd love to read it out on a future episode of the show. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways you can support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Your word-of-mouth recommendations are definitely worth their weight in gold. You can subscribe to my show in various ways. iTunes, visit inallairness.com/review, add it to your Stitcher playlist, inallairness.com/Stitcher. You can also subscribe on Pocket Casts, Player FM, TuneIn Radio, and other podcatchers. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter @inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.